Welcome to QDL. QDL is your look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest. Countries like France, Norway, and the UK have all set dates for ICE bans, internal combustion engine bans. Norway's is actually by 2025. Several cities within Europe have announced similar bans on ICE vehicles, including Rome and Milan, which ban ICE vehicles from entering certain parts of the city. In California, where we live, the governor signed an executive order that requires all new car and passenger trucks sold in California to be zero-emission vehicles by 2035. So all of that said, the recent industry research shows that the automotive industry, surprisingly, is really not prepared for a full-on pivot to electric vehicles. According to recent research conducted by Hexagon Manufacturing Intelligence with 416 automotive professionals around the world, only 8% of them recognize that their current business models are too slow to meet incoming ban deadlines. This leaves these companies open for risk of competition from digital native companies such as Apple and Tesla. The data show that 52% are reluctant to adapt to new ways of working in order to compete. Even Paolo Guglielmini, president of Hexagon's Manufacturing Intelligence division, made the point that Automakers' challenges in getting a foothold in the new EV world are as much internal as they are external. So here today to discuss these findings with us is Keith Perrin, Industry Director for Hexagon Manufacturing Intelligence. Hi Keith, thanks for joining us.
Hi Dirk, glad to be here. Thanks for the time.
This report actually seems a little surprising because I think all major auto manufacturers, or all manufacturers actually, are producing EV vehicles. So what is the problem?
Well, it's really, as the report suggests, an internal one. For many years, we've had auto manufacturers producing cars. Their method, the supply chain, the processes that they've been to producing cars have been around in some cases since the 20s, right? So now we have new technologies coming to bear with new processes that come with them, a new supply chain to come with that, and a whole new way of doing things. And that's putting some tremendous pressures on things. You know, this isn't the first industry to see these changes. The media industry has been there before. The retail industry is going through this now. The automotive industry is going through it as well. So there's a lot of change coming to the fore with these companies right now.
So is the problem, obviously they know how to make EVs, everybody's doing it. So is the problem more of scaling up? And is it a problem with the process? Is it a problem with, the tools they're working with? Is it maybe even just a mindset?
That's a good question. So I tend to put things down to a scaling problem. The methods of engineering a new type of vehicle with an electric motor are it's engineering challenge. Now, for the most part, most companies are able to either get new skills or work with a partner that has them. But that in itself can be a challenge in some cases. What's accommodating that, though, is the speed of change that's coming with these new things. It's not just an EV problem. When you look at what some of these cars are made out of these days, they've got as much in common as with your cell phone as they do with a traditional car that's made in 1950, for example.
Sure.
And those cell phones and modern electronics are made in an entirely different way. You know, we're talking about agile manufacturing process, agile development, scrums, DevOps, continuous improvement and deployment. These are happening in software and electronics and have been for some time. Well, now they're starting to be applied to the production of automotive vehicles. And that is a big change. That's a mindset change. Culturally, process-wise, organizationally, it impacts everything we do. So that is where some of the challenges start to lie. That's where we see a lot of traditionally electronic companies starting to get into this field and take the opportunity to take advantage of this change, this pivot, and start to drive their expertise into this area. And we do see that. So we're working with some of the more traditional companies, as you can imagine, but also some of those new upstarts that are causing all the trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying is that the issue is because you mentioned agile and scrums. You mentioned a lot of terms that would be very familiar with anybody who worked in the software injury industry or the electronics industry, particularly if they're in consumer. So it sounds like what you're saying is that automotive companies just don't know how to move quickly and don't know how to change gears quickly enough. They're not agile, I guess is what you'd say.
Well, totally, right. So in in some companies I've worked for, there's a term called about the traditional companies called the sausage machine, right? You've got
Right.
this business that's been really well tuned to do what it does, to produce, in this case, vehicles really cost effectively, really efficiently, and they're great at doing that. We're asking it to do something else. We want a stake in the front at the back, right? All of a sudden, the sausage machine starts to buck. It doesn't know how to deal with it. So we've got to somehow complement what we were doing with the new way of doing things. And that's not easy, right? You've got your traditional way of doing business and the new way of business operating under the same roof. That's tremendously hard. Many companies don't make that transition, as we know from those aforementioned industries. Not all those traditional companies are around anymore.
Right.
And there's some new names kicking around that were enabled to adopt. So, yeah, that is a tough call. And it can sound a bit trivial, particularly to engineers' eyes, right? It's just an engine. What could possibly be wrong? But from an organizational perspective, it is a big change. And not just for the engineers and the developers and manufacturing, there's a whole range of business organization around that. Just something as simple as the way to scale is entirely different, as we know, right? In some of these these newer industries, releasing a product and then updating it as you go is an entirely acceptable thing to do. Back in the day, that is entirely unacceptable thing to do with some of the more quality-oriented companies in particular. And we've seen that, right? There's one company I seem to remember released a software update not too recently and managed to get a 10% improvement in miles per gallon. Right? Unheard of in the past, right? Did that mean you introduced a product that didn't work before?
Right.
No, we just made it better, of course, right? Very different way of working.
So if automotive companies are going to kind of embrace a more agile mindset, what are some of the key technologies, do you think, that they are going to have to incorporate, embrace, get their head around in order to move in that direction?
There's a couple of ideas from a technology perspective, but also a process perspective that we're going to have to adopt, I believe, at the same time. Digital technologies for development, it sounds obvious. They've been around for a while, but they're being adopted in a different way now. The world of digital twins is now very common, right?
Right.
So the idea of a digital model isn't new, but the idea of a digital twin is a slightly new and fresh take on it, where I can take the actual reality of something and digitize it and then couple it with a digital model and then iterate between those two worlds, making improvements. So now I've got the real world and my digital world in sync. I can iterate on those much, much faster than ever I could before. And I can iterate on them at a speed that, well, software will allow me to. And that's very similar to the software world. So what we used to do, of course, was take a digital model and then apply a traditional process to it. Well, that's, in hindsight, crazy. What were we thinking, right?
Right.
Obviously, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So the idea of things like digital twins and the digital threads, aka the processes that go with them, are tremendously important. And then we start applying that to manufacturing processes and quality processes is extremely important, right? That core idea for quality is massive. Being able to digitize the thing you're actually delivering versus the somewhat idealistic traditional viewpoint, right? We can start to make real changes and real impact on the shop floor that way from a quality perspective. And we can do it much faster than we could before. So those are two simple examples there. There's a whole bunch more. I touched on some of the ideas there with continuous improvement as well, right? The idea, though, I perhaps might release a product that could be improved over time after it's been released. Ideas like that are common in the software world, but maybe not so much common yet, I want to say, in the mechanical world.
Right. You mentioned digital twins, and that's been around for a while. I think most of our audience is going to be familiar with digital twins. You just gave a great description of it. But I'm also hearing the term digital native. Now, is that just another word for the same thing, or is that a whole different concept?
That's a good point. Right. So when the term I first came across, digital native, was when a lot of the more cloud native companies were releasing products. Right? We all have it in our front room, right? Netflix, companies like this, right? And they were iterating on their offerings live and in front of millions, thousands of times a day in some cases, right? So these worlds, these processes, and the people that work with them are very familiar and used to those operations and those processes, to the point where there's a whole mindset shift from the old way of doing things, which was very waterfall and sequential, to the new way of doing things, which to a traditionalist looks kind of chaotic. So up pops the rise of digital native, whether it's from an attitude perspective or a personnel perspective. So that's where I first heard it. And I hear it a lot in software. I'm increasingly hearing it in the mechanical world, particularly where anything with electronics or any smart devices is concerned, any smarter systems, that kind of thing. Another key technology, which I didn't really mention earlier, by the way, very important. But that's where I've heard it. And I think that's, it might be new and fresh now, but not so much in other industries. And I think we're increasingly going to move there.
Okay. So just to stay on this a little bit, so I can brainstorm with you. So it sounds like digital twin is an actual thing. We've got the physical device. We're gonna create the digital model of it. We're gonna sync them up. It sounds like digital native is more of a mindset, where from the very beginning you're thinking in terms of everything is digitized, everything is sitting on a cloud somewhere, and we're working from that.
I kind of think that way. Yes.
Okay.
Aligning those ideas to what the customer wants, very key idea. Ideas like design thinking, the way you would organize the systems that are used to define your design, your manufacturing process to that particular ideal. And the way you would then break those systems down into individual work groups is entirely different from what's gone on before. Okay. It's a different way of thinking. So yeah.
In final question here, just to let you kind of prognosticate a little bit. Hexagon, obviously, large company, very large company. You're involved in probably every automaker on the planet has got Hexagon equipment of some sort or another in it, as well as their software. Matter of fact, I think you guys even say that 95% of the automobile companies out there have some sort of Hexagon something in their company. So from your perspective, being able to look into what these companies are doing on a day-to-day basis as you're out there selling your equipment, working with your equipment, does it feel like they are going to be able to meet these deadlines, incorporate these tools that we were just talking about? I mean, are these band deadlines, ICE band deadlines, do you think they're realistic on the ground within the automotive companies themselves?
I do. We are seeing two ends of the spectrum, like I said, the more traditionalists and some of the cutting edge guys. But, we've been working with them across the board, and they are adopting. As you can imagine, nobody's going to be sitting still, whether it's a company like Foxconn on one side, or Tesla, or Lucid Motors, Valeo. We're working with a lot of them. What's interesting is the rate they're adopting it and getting this idea, right? So we like to pride ourselves that we're somewhat unique in our industry because we have all of the hardware devices to digitize reality, right? Whether it's a CMM device or a scanner, whatever it is, we can digitize it there. And then we can couple it to that digital world and start to help them iterate. And, the engineers, they're bright sparks. They know this. And they're starting to iterate on it, in many cases pushing ahead without us, right? So they're already getting the idea. I think the way in which we start to manage those processes is going to change. And we're seeing a new way of thinking coming about around some of that, more akin to those software design. If you think about particularly the way mechanical design has been working, really sequential processes and systems to support those sequential processes have been, really all the rage, so to speak, for the past 20 to 30 years. I like to think because of our unique position, we're seeing something slightly different to come out, a unique viewpoint. And I think we're going to see a different way of working that's a more a closer marriage between those software ideas and the mechanical world come about. And I think that's going to be interesting for us as well. I think we're going to be seeing some quite significant change in our industry moving forward to help support these companies. And that's going to be really interesting. As we do, I think, every company I'm talking to right now is talking about Industry 4.0 and digitization. Of course, they're doing these things. But they are really trying to figure out how they can marry that new world to the old world. And that's where, frankly, exciting things are starting to happen. So, yeah, I do think they're doing it. I think they're going to do it at different rates, of course, right? Some are going to be forcing it, and we know who they are, right? And how many times have you heard Tesla mentioned ever?
Right.
I mean, every example is Tesla. But others are doing it, right?
Yeah.
I just mentioned one, Foxconn, right?
Yeah.
They've made no secret of their ambitions to get in this world. Another company in Vietnam we're dealing with, VinFast, right? Some awesome companies taking the opportunity to get in this. They're starting to cause some pressure on the traditionalists, and they're responding. So, I do think we're going to see some change. The rate of change and who's going to still be able to keep up with it, that's a different question. But, yeah, I think they will.
Okay. All right. Keith Perrin, Industry Director for Hexagon Manufacturing Intelligence. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Dirk. I'm glad to be here.
And that is it for today's QDL. Thanks to all of you for joining us. If there's somebody you'd like to bring on a show, some topic you'd like us to discuss, some equipment you'd like to see, just let us know. You can just email us at qdl@qualitydigest.com, and we will do our best. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you at the next QDL. So long.